So, hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Demae Buna. I'm co-founder and CMO of Chezi. For those who aren't familiar with our platform, we are an all-in-one solution to help you manage your employee resource groups to take them from intent to impact. My brother and I founded Chezi in June of 2020, and we originally launched as like a glass door for minorities. So the thought there was like, I as a Black woman can find out what it's like to be a Black woman at Google or Facebook, at any prospective company in order to make a more informed career decision. And then last summer, we pivoted to focus more on employee resource groups just because we've both led employee resource groups and we know how impactful they can be on the minority experience. We've just identified a few pain points that we wanted to solve for. So again, our platform allows you to seamlessly track membership, engagement, events, budget, all to give you time back to focus on the things that are driving employee engagement and satisfaction. So if you want to talk more about your employee resource groups and how Chezi can help along the way, feel free to contact me at demaby@chezi.co, and I'll drop my email in the chat. But for today's presentation, I'm going to pass it over to my wonderful teammate, Maceo, and she's going to take us through how we can help prevent ERG burnout for our ERG leaders. So Maceo, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Super excited to kick off this conversation. While I pull up my slides, I would just love to see who is in the room today, I guess in terms of who I'm speaking to. So typically with this conversation, it'll typically get some engagement from either ERG leaders. So if you're an ERG leader, just say ERG leader in the chat. If you're an ERG program manager, lead an ERG program, you can say, ERG program leader. And then potentially sometimes there's just people within the D&I HR space who just want to know how to better support their ERG leaders. That happens more often than not, as a lot of these ERGs across companies may not necessarily have some one person who helps lead. So if you're just a contributing, HR leader, you can drop it in the chat. Yay. I love the engagement. I can't see faces, so it's the chat that really helps me know if you all are with me or not. But this is great. This is great. So it feels like we have a lot of ERG leaders, some people ops, some program. Okay, we have a pretty good mix here. So just know when I do speak on this topic, I am going to put most of the on the ERG program manager, the person who's leading the ERG program. If your company has that, and if you're that person, just know 90% of what I'm saying, I'm talking to you. Now, let's just say hypothetically, your company doesn't have that one person who helps lead ERGs, or maybe there's no one. It's just you're a leader and that's it. So in that case, I'll say you can take some of these tips back to your the rest of your ERG leader team. And hopefully you can apply this to see how you can get some things going and also help prevent your fellow ERG leaders from burning out too, because we don't want that. So, okay, to get started, I can give a quick intro about myself. So my name is Maceo. I have self-branded myself as the ERG homegirl on LinkedIn. So you can follow me there as well, where I speak a lot about ERGs. I'm very passionate about them because truly ERGs changed my life. I will say ever since I joined my first ERG program, my career has went nothing but up. And that's really what I want to see for more people. I know that if ERG programs are really strong, then we can help to create this experience for others like me who otherwise would have no chance to interact with executives and to get this leadership experience. So that's why I'm really passionate about ERGs. I'll speak to it more as the presentation goes on. And I am in Detroit, Michigan. I saw a few people, some people from Flint, I think, some people from Detroit. So shout out to you all. Also originally from Florida too. So I think I saw a couple people put that in the chat as well. So yeah, excited. And just a few points to my experience here. I lead an ERG program currently at Opentable and Kayak. I've also led ERGs at DoorDash, and that's actually I think like 3 years ago, believe it or not. I was just a support agent and I got introduced to ERGs, and here I am now. So it's because that original ERG program that's kind of led me to where I am. And I've had experience with ERGs at all touch points. So I've been an ERG leader myself. I've been just an ERG member. I've led the program. And also I've been at companies where no one knows about ERGs. I'll just put that out there too. So I'll say I've had every touch point there, and that's kind of what I'm speaking from. I like to speak from experience. So I'm not teaching anything that I'm not actively doing or haven't attempted myself. Last thing here. My 3 personal values, which will show up a lot in this presentation. 3 things. Number 1, I'm always authentic. So I like to just be myself. So I speak pretty informally, like this is just kind of who I am. And it also obviously goes with the ERG homegirl brand that I have here. So just know this is kind of how I speak and how I show up. But that being said, I also operate in integrity. So I'm going to say there are some Chezzy plugs in here, but just know it's not just because I'm an advisor at Chezzy, but I'll also say it's because I genuinely believe in the product. So I'm not here to sell you anything, but I will say there are some plugs in here in terms of like ways that you can engage with Chezzy if you're not familiar with it. But just know with the always authentic piece, I'm not going to say anything that I don't believe in, or once again, that I have not actively tried myself. And lastly, lead with value. I definitely just want to provide you all with as much value as possible. I'm not actually trying to sell you on anything. So I just want you all really to learn, like I said, regardless of if you're an ERG leader or if you lead a program, or if you're just curious to learn more about ERGs and maybe in the future want to set them up at your company the right way. I'm going to try to give you all some sort of takeaway here for sure. So that's my goal. All right, we can get into it then. Let's go into what burnout is for one. I think that this is a really good tone setter for this conversation. Oftentimes we talk about burnout and we kind of have an idea of what it is. The definition would be a mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. So now that we understand the definition of burnout, it makes it really easy for us to work backwards. So we don't want ERG leaders to overwork themselves, and we don't want them to feel stressed. Plain and simple. That being said, there is a balance with ERGs, and I will use this as a disclaimer. On the other hand, there is a form of ERG disengagement where maybe someone's not even to the point of burning out because they're not engaged in the ERG at all. So therefore, they're not working within the ERG, and they're not stressed out at all because they don't actually have any connection to the ERG. So just know that is a different conversation for a different day in terms of how to engage ERG leaders. This is more so centered around ERG leaders who have a really strong passion for the work. They really want to make change for their community, but we don't want those people who care so much to be the ones that burn out, basically. So hopefully that makes sense. We know what we're trying to avoid now. So from there, what are we going to discuss today? We're going to discuss why ERG leaders burn out, and then what you can do to help combat ERG burnout. We'll talk about 5 ways, and then plus I'll give a bonus just because I have to. So that being said, why do ERG leaders burn out? Since we have some engagement in the chat, I just want to get some thoughts. Anyone have ideas, hypotheses on why burnout happens and why it specifically happens with ERG leaders more often? I'll give you a hint. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I did post one significant idea yesterday. Lack of support and appreciation, definitely. Their ERG work happens on top of their regular work. Exactly. They're also volunteers. That's a big one. Lack of commitment from leadership, that definitely shows up as well. Emotional and mental load of intersectionality. That is big too. Sorry, I have to take drinks in the middle of this, but I think this emotional and mental load, that's the one we're going to really hone in on. There are all the things that you all have mentioned too: no clear succession plan, lack of clear goals, lack of engagement. Those are also pieces, but we're going to first talk about the responsibility that comes with being an ERG leader. I will speak from personal experience for when I first became an ERG leader. Once I found out that me, coming out of support, young African-American woman in support, had access now to all these executives, had access to all these resources. Once I got in that position, immediately, all I could think of is how can I help other people like me to get in this position? Oftentimes with ERG leaders, they feel this sense of responsibility in that they want to help their community. They want to say, I get what ERGs can do. Now I feel this responsibility. I feel like this weight and this burden is on me to do this for my people. And more times than not, within your ERG, eventually 1 to 2 people will start to stick out as the people who really have that passion for their community, whether that's people of color or whether that's veterans or women. Like, there's a few people who you will notice within your ERG leadership team who really just have that drive. Oftentimes, if you're an ERG leader and you're here, that's probably you. So I just want to say you are definitely my favorite type of ERG leaders, because you have that care. But that being said, you all are the ones who are most at risk for burning out because you have this passion. It weighs a lot on you. So that being said, just keep that in mind. The passion is good, and that's why I mentioned that burden is important, but this responsibility that lays on ERGs is huge. So in addition to responsibility, then these spurts of work happen. And this can happen at different times of the year, maybe within your Heritage Month, or maybe just sometimes you're really motivated by external things happening within the world. So we know with things like Roe v. Wade, like we feel this passion burn up within us. And that being said, that moves us to want to work extra hard for our ERGs. Put a 1 in the chat if that's you, if you've ever been in that situation where you just have this passion for your community and you want to show up for them. Oftentimes, I know for me, when I first became an ERG lead, it was in December of 2019, roughly. At first I was coasting, but then when June of 2020 happened, you can imagine, I quickly became this person where I'm like, I feel right now for my community and I feel like someone needs to show up for them. So it has to be me. 9 times out of 10, like I said, if you're that ERG leader, just know, like, I resonate with you a lot. So when it came to June of 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement, at the company that I was at, I was okay with putting in all of my effort, all of my extracurricular time, keeping in mind, this is a volunteer role, but I was willing to give my all for my community in that sense. So I stayed up late trying to type up messaging and just host these decompression sessions so that employees could come in and feel comfortable speaking about how they feel, but that also adds to that emotional burden that we talked about earlier. So you get into these spurts of work, you're already super passionate. So what else happens after that? Well, then you start to feel alone, and you can't fully blame the rest of the ERG leadership team, because 9 times out of 10, you told them at some point, like, look, I'm okay with taking on the weight here. But at the same time, it does get lonely when you're putting in all of this work into your ERG. You keep on going through these spurts of hard work. And at first, like the first few times that you really go, if you've been through one of these spurts, and I definitely saw some ones in the chat. So if you've been through one of these, and that means that at first, you know, it's not so bad. You feel that sense of accomplishment saying like, I did something really good. But eventually you start to get that lonely feeling like, I really feel like if there are more of me, if there are other people who had the same passion that I had, we could get so much more accomplished. Or, you know, it's a lonely road. So that being said, that's another thing that comes up, that feeling of loneliness. In addition, next thing that happens, frustrated at the lack of impact. This also I can speak to. Coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a lot of hype around supporting the Black community. That being said, I'm thinking, because there's a lot of hype around it, that means that we're actually going to make change. I even led a council of external customers, we'll call them customers for now. And I'm thinking that with this council, that means that change is going to happen. Like, I'm pumped up. But then with being an ERG leader, especially if you've been one for any extended period of time, you know that eventually you realize that you don't have the impact that you thought you would originally have. You may think that, oh, because we have this ERG, that means that immediately people are going to start respecting pronouns. Like, they're going to start using them in the day-to-day job, where it's not like that. There's a process and it's longer, and now you need approvals to get things pushing through. Just type a yes in the chat if you've been there. I just need to know I'm not alone in this. But I've definitely been there where we wanted to make a change and then nothing happened. Yeah, frustration beyond belief. Because now you have this passion and you're saying, what am I even doing this for? Because I'm doing all this work and it doesn't mean anything. That can really drive it. And lastly, another factor of all of this is that that's when you start saying like, well, what is success? Like what really is this ERG in its best state? What is this ERG doing? And it just gets really frustrating. We'll kind of go into a little bit more so around what success really is and how to measure that and how to help it combat ERG leader burnout. But definitely that feeling of saying, I don't even know if what I'm doing is worth it because there is no goal. There's nothing that I'm working towards. So this often is what we see within ERG leads that happen. And that's what we're trying to prevent. Because oftentimes when all of those things come together, it creates this burnout. Now, what does burnout look like? Look, you don't have to say me in the chat. You don't even have to acknowledge that it's you. But just say, I don't know what to say. Say true. If any of these things have ever applied to anyone that you've ever seen in ERG leadership, doesn't have to be you, but let's just say all of a sudden people are slowing down in their work. They're not executing like they once did. They used to show up to the ERG meetings regularly, even to the ERG lead meetings regularly. Now, not so much. Also, maybe a little bit of cynicism, where whenever you're talking about making a change or someone's talking about, oh, this ERG is going to do this, a little bit of negativity sets in. Just put it true in the chat. Lack of creativity, like ideas are no longer flowing to you. And then decreased enthusiasm as a whole. It happens. And I have been there where it's just like, I'm exhausted. And this comes from those previous things that we spoke about. And to be clear, those things that we mentioned earlier, not an exhaustive list. You all also mentioned some really great ones in the chat too, in terms of not feeling supported by leaders, etc. So all these things do happen. And as a result, this is what burnout can look like. It's important also too to identify these things, because if you do potentially start seeing these in yourself, just know, number one, don't feel bad about it, because I want to be clear. If you're feeling this way, it means that at some point you had that passion and that care to start with. And that's really the makings of a really good ERG leader, is actually caring about your community. The problem here isn't the fact that you care so much. It's the fact that there's no, well, you know, I'm about to get into that with the solutions, right? Getting ahead of myself here. So we know what ERG leadership looks like. Now, how do we prevent burnout? That's the question. What are the things that happen? Number one, as an ERG program manager, I'm going to speak to other program managers like myself. Before we jump to a solution in terms of how do we prevent this, like how do we stop this from happening in the future, it's really big that we diagnose the problem. As a doctor, before a doctor prescribes you with a medication, what do they do? What do they typically do? I'm looking in the chat, just so y'all know. Before they prescribe a medication, exactly, they assess. They have to ask questions. They talk to you about your symptoms. That is what needs to be done. 1 second. So in this case, it's really important that as ERG program managers, that we do the work of assessing the situation. We interview the situation. I even heard someone mention it as. How do we do this? A few ways. To start off, a listening tour is really big. And I say specifically, very specifically, a listening tour, because more times than not, I see that people go to surveys as their go-to, where a survey is, number one, not as personal. People may just feel like a survey is performative, even to some degree. So surveys are not always the answer. These one-on-one conversations, I have learned from my personal experience, they really help someone to feel more validated when they speak. They feel also more like you're listening to what they're saying. And you can tell them too, like, I'm taking notes on what you're saying. I'm really trying to make a change and help prevent ERG leader burnout, or in many cases, it's not just about the action of a one-time prevention, but also preventing, I'll just say, it's an active word. It's something that you have to actively fight. So I'm trying to keep you all from being burnt out, but I need to understand what the pain points are. So like a doctor, you want to ask these questions, actual one-on-ones that you're having. You might even say, well, that's time consuming to have these one-on-ones. Like we have 20 plus ERG leaders, but as an ERG program manager, I think one of the number one things that I see trending right now is saying like, oh, well, I have other things that I have to focus on, but really it's the ERG leaders that have to really feel cared for. And those are the people who are going to execute really what you're trying to accomplish for your bigger picture here. So it's important that you give them time. Honestly, I even say on a quarterly basis, something, like I said, you have to build it in, even if it's like a 15-minute coffee chat, that's not so bad. You can do that within a week. But people will feel, like I said, they'll feel heard. On these listening tours, make sure that you ask consistent questions across the board. What this will be able to do is really be able to give you some data to work with. And like I said, we'll talk about data in a bit, but listening tours, hearing from people, that's oftentimes quantifiable data that you're speaking to. Qualifiable. I can't speak right now. Oftentimes that's just verbal, like people telling you how they feel. It's not quantifiable in that sense, but you can turn a listening tour into quantifiable data if you ask these consistent questions. Because then when you look at your notes after, you can say, okay, I asked this question across the board. These are the people that said yes. These are the people that said no. That's numbers that you can use. These are the people that said that lack of executive support was a problem. So now when I have conversations with executives, I can bring this number, this data to them. And oftentimes I find that executives really respect numbers and data. So that really helps to change the conversation. We're getting into the solution though, but just know a listening tour, very important. Thing two, evaluate yourself. And when I say yourself, I'm talking to program managers again, not talking to the leads right now. As a program manager, the questions and hard questions oftentimes that you have to ask yourself is, how involved have I been within the day-to-day of ERG work? Sometimes we can get so wrapped up in our world of separate projects that we can start to miss these gaps that are existing within our current ERG processes. So how involved have you been? Have you been showing up occasionally, at least, to the ERG leads meetings when they collectively meet together? Or even if they meet within, like all the women's ERG leads meet together. Do you ever show up to those? That matters, especially early stages within an ERG, because they probably still need the guidance to help direct themselves. We'll get into that. Jumping ahead, I do that a lot. Secondly, when is the last time that you worked to make the lives of your ERG leaders easier? You may have already stood up the program and done the work of setting up some processes and policies, but when is the last time that you really assessed those and said, here's how I can improve it as a whole? Another question. Lastly, have you followed through with everything that you said you would? Because oftentimes when an ERG leader joins, they may believe that they're joining it. Let's just say, for example, for mentorship. Are they getting what they thought they were going to get from the ERG program? Questions for you to ask, like, wow, am I following through? Because oftentimes we said lack of executive support is one of the causes of ERG leader burnout, but honestly, lack of true support from the ERG program manager, the person that people are looking to for guidance, can also be just, if not more, detracting from their experience. Lastly, check your numbers. We'll discuss the data. I know I keep saying that. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know I'm really big on data. Like that's one of my main things. So just know, like I said, we'll touch on it, but the full story of what's happening, the diagnosis, like before we prescribe a medication, the full diagnosis lies at the intersection between these qualitative answers. So what we hear from people, what we evaluate from ourselves, and then the quantitative answers. So whatever the data tells us, plus whatever we're hearing put together, that gives us a really good story. If you're into design thinking, that's one of like the first principles with design thinking, user design, is really understanding the problem. So that's step one here. All right, we're going to get into the solutions now. So I know that that's like the part everyone's excited for. Number one, remind ERG leaders why they started in the first place. Like I said, that passion ERG leaders have. When they get to that burnt out stage, like we discussed earlier, that means that they're likely feeling, like I said, cynical, like the opposite of passion. So it's important that we have some sort of process in place in terms of reminding and like reinvigorating the ERG leads. That's the word I'm looking for. Specifically, some recommendations that I have around this would be reevaluating the mission and vision. That's a big one. A lot of ERGs have mission, vision, values, but 9 times out of 10, if you were to ask your ERG leaders right now what their mission was, without anything in front of them, what's the likelihood that they would know? Honestly, you don't have to answer it in the chat, but just think about it. That being said, it's important that across the board with each ERG, there's a really good understanding of ultimately, why are we doing this? That's what the mission statement is really about. It's not about having a performative statement that lives on a website, but it's why does this ERG truly exist? And oftentimes when people go to join their ERG, people will ask the ERG leaders, like, what's this ERG about? And if they don't have an answer, or even worse, if they're burnt out, that's going to keep people from even wanting to participate in the ERG program as a whole. So that's why the mission is really big. Same thing with the vision. It's, once again, not a performative statement. It's more so, what is the impact that we hope to have in 5 years, 10 years? What is the big picture of this ERG? Anyway, definitely time to maybe do another mission and vision workshop there. Also, each ERG leader, unless they're voluntold ERG leaders, because that's a different, like I mentioned at the beginning, that's a different conversation. For ERG leaders that have been volunteered to participate as leaders of ERGs, 9 times out of 10, they're the ones who need enthusiasm to even get to a point where they care. So we're not talking about that. But for ERG leaders who have volunteered, who have said, I want to take extra time out of my day on top of my day job to do this work, they have a reason why. They have some real connection to their community. And I'm willing to bet that you all in the chat, almost everyone here, has some sort of strong story. Actually, just put story in the chat if you feel like you have a reason why you're trying to show up for your community every day as an ERG leader, as an ERG program manager. If you have some strong connection to a community, put story in the chat. I know I'm not alone, because I definitely have a story. I have stories for days, quite frankly, on why I want to show up for my community, or even for ERGs as a whole. That's something else. But yes, we have, I see like 15 different comments, stories. So clearly we're not alone. A lot of ERG leaders, they really care. But if they were to talk about why they care, that's something that can motivate them. So maybe you ask them, if comfortable, within these listening tours, you can ask them, why did you originally volunteer to become an ERG leader? Even go one step further, maybe at their next member meeting, that's really what they base it on, like asking the members and even themselves as leaders speaking on, this is why I'm part of this ERG. Those type of conversations are big. Trust me, we just had one yesterday at Opentable and Kayak. I'll just say, hearing that was motivational for me, and I was an ally to the community that I joined, but just hearing other people talk about, this is why I need the space, very moving. And that's something that can really reignite something in someone. Even if they're at a point of being burnt out, hopefully they're not, but if we're trying to prevent it, we got to keep the passion going. So that's one thing. And I mentioned this a little bit with the mission piece, but you want to make sure that the mission is baked into everything that the ERG does. It's on brand with the mission. You're not trying to do different things. If your mission is around recruiting, representation, you don't want to always focus on ally education, for instance. Like you have to be on brand with what's your mission. And if your mission does include education in that piece, then yes. But making sure that you're being consistent with what you said the ERG is about, that also is a big piece in keeping the ERG leaders engaged. But having them tell their ERG story, that's a big one. And you can even start with yours. I think everyone here has some sort of community or people that they're looking out for. So by you telling yours, that might open up space for them to speak, frankly, to theirs. Another way to remind them why they started is to have them hear from other people. So maybe you see things on LinkedIn that are just like inspiring ERG activities. I try to keep like a running collection of inspiring ERG activities and forward them to the leads when I can. This way they can kind of get some motivation from that. Also, I'll say outside of your company's ERGs, there are communities where you can get to talk to other ERG leaders. Chesy does have a community. I said there were going to be Chesy plugs. So if you go to their website, you'll see that they do have a community that that ERG leaders and even program managers like you can join and just ask questions, things like that. Free, all free. Anyway, not trying to sell you on anything. But yeah, getting them around other ERG leaders is really important there. Lastly, I'll say too, not just in a Slack space or something like that type of community, but something else that you can do is bring in another company's ERG leads. Oftentimes you might say, like, can I find another company's ERG leaders? Well, you can reach out to them on LinkedIn. I've done that many times. Honestly, I don't know if Gerald is on here right now. He might be, but shout out to him because I had him come in and speak to one of our ERG's leaders. He leads a veterans ERG. And honestly, when I tell you, they still talk about it to this day in terms of like the ideas that it gave them. And since that conversation, since me having Gerald come in and just speak to our ERG leaders about what they're doing at their company, that ERG has honestly, I have not even needed really to be hands-on with like them moving into doing things. So yeah, I will say, I see someone said they would love to connect as an ERG leader. If you're also open to like potentially talk to other ERG, like companies, ERGs, definitely probably put that in the chat so people can connect. I'll answer questions at the end because I see some of those too, but I don't want to forget my train of thought. But definitely, if you're free to like help show up for your community at other companies and like motivate other people, then hey, put it in the chat. I'm open to connect. I'm open to having these conversations. But really, it's that willingness. Like I said, that's really changed the game for that ERG that I had them come in and speak to. So that's one. Remind them why they started. Thing two, we need some visibility to the data. Okay, this is the data piece that I talked about. I'm a really big data fan, so I have to hone it in because I know we don't have a ton of time. But I will just say, what is not measured cannot be improved. And honestly, data, it inspires creativity to help people improve whatever the situation is. So let's just say, actually, no, that's the second part. That's the second part. Thing one is you have to have data, which honestly, a lot of ERG programs don't really have strong data. And don't worry, I'm not attacking you with that, and in that you may not have like really strong data. Most companies, just being frank, right now, what they use from a data perspective is seeing how many people attended our last event, like, and just a number, not even seeing who, but just saying like, oh yeah, how many people attended our last event, or how many people are in our Slack channel. Put a yes in the channel if you've ever been there. Not saying your ERG program is there now, but if how you track ERG performance is saying how many people are in our Slack channel or how many people attended our last event. Yeah, I see a lot of yeses. it's often that we do this, but I'll just say really quick, there are a few other things that you can pull from that you have access to right now, especially if you already said that you're using Zoom and Slack, because Zoom and Slack have so many analytics. I'm not going to go into it in this presentation. I'm always open to have these conversations. I love having them, but just know Slack and Zoom have analytics. And if you maximize the use out of those, which are available to you, no extra cost. You might have to go through your IT team, but they are there. But if you utilize those, it'll give you more information. Like, can you imagine being able to say 50% of the marketing team is involved in our ERG, or even, let's be more realistic, 12% of the marketing team is involved in our ERG. That being said, let's do an event around marketing in LGBTQ representation in marketing. And now all of a sudden you have more engagement in your ERG because you're speaking to what that person does in their day-to-day job, or maybe they didn't even know your ERG existed, but because you're targeting that event towards a specific teams, towards a specific role, now you're getting way more engagement. This is stuff, like I said, once you have data, you're able to start thinking creatively. There's questions likely that you need answering that will really make a difference when it comes to the performance of your ERG. So start to think of the questions, like, what if I knew how many new employees were less than 90 days that were involved in the ERG program? What could I do with that information? Ask these questions. But anyway, from an ERG program manager perspective, you have to have the data. This way, ERG leaders can ask questions. This way, they can start being creative. That'll ignite that spark. Secondly, you have to visualize the data, because oftentimes this data will live in a spreadsheet or, an Excel sheet, a Google sheet. It'll live in a sheet, but people can't see what it means. I'm not going to ask you to verify that in the chat, because I already know 9 times out of 10 that this is what it is. That being said, visualizing the data means you have charts, you have actual recommendations next to what the data is, next to just saying 50% of the marketing team is engaged. Now you have a recommendation. Hey, you can increase engagement by doing X, Y, and Z. Now, like I said, another Chezzy plug coming. I'll just say, Chezzy makes it happen, where you can not only get an answer to all the questions I've said already, but imagine being able to filter it by not just department, but by location, and understanding, like if you have outside of the US, specifically like APAC, and you want to know like how many of our APAC employees, or even more so the percentage of APAC employees that are engaged. Percentage is good, because if you just get a number, doesn't mean as much as saying only 25% of APAC employees have ever joined into our events. So imagine if you had that, what questions that could answer. I'm just, like I said, I was going to put out Chezzy plugs, but always authentic. So just know it's something I truly believe in, because I mean, the data, I gotta love it. So that's another piece. Wrapping up here, I promise. So we have time for questions. Next, the ERG leaders have to have a plan. Like I said, I'm speaking mainly to ERG program managers, but let's just say, even if you are an ERG leader yourself here, you can be that person for your ERG lead team that helps give a plan. So now that you have access to the data, you can then set a goal. What are we striving for this year? And even if you do this year, you can work backwards and say, okay, so how will we know that we're on track this quarter? What are we looking to do? So it's important that you have these target metrics, because a really good quote that I heard, let's see if I put it in my notes here. I didn't, so I'm gonna have to do it off the top of my head, but I think I can do it. Burnout will always happen when people are working hard, but don't know the end goal. That's not the quote, but it's close. It's close to what the quote was. So that's why it's important that target metrics are clear. And that also goes back to mission, vision, values, because then oftentimes these goals that you can set will be in line with your mission statement. So now that you have a good understanding of representation of your community within the company, now you can say, oh, we want to increase it by 10% within the next year. So this quarter, we need to increase it by 2.5%. That means we're on track. That helps people have a very clear focus. So that's one thing. Having a strategy, that means that we're not just saying we have a goal, but now we're breaking it down into how we're going to accomplish that goal. As an ERG program manager, how are you going to better equip your ERG leaders to reach that goal is a question. Are you going to connect them with people within your company? If they need help recruiting and increasing representation of their community, obviously you need to connect them with the recruiting team. So having a goal makes it easier than to have a strategy on how to accomplish that goal. And then every ERG leader knows their place in helping to make that goal happen. Lastly, I think this is lastly, make their job easier. This is a big one. And this one, I'm definitely talking specifically to ERG program managers, because this is the step that we always forget, but it's okay. It's not shade in this case, because oftentimes we see, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, companies are in a rush to start up an ERG program so much that they don't even care about what's involved in the day-to-day. They don't care about setting up processes and writing out really lengthy documents to help ERG leaders understand how to execute. They just want to program up, which is, it's well-intentioned. Well-intentioned. That being said, it might be time, no shade to any company who's done it. But that being said, it might be time for you to go back and say, is it really clear right now for ERG leaders to execute their job? If they were to throw an event, is it really clear on what the steps are to throw that event? Clear, repeatable processes. Because if it's not clear, then let's say you go on vacation. They don't know how to do it. And honestly, whenever people get that sense of confusion, that sense of feeling overwhelmed, that is also something that can lead to burnout. So making it really easy for them to execute their job is big here. Also, automation is big. See, I put Chesy plug again. I think it's my last one. But honestly, what am I trying to say? Automation is good because then people don't have to do necessarily every step. Now you have to identify every step that needs to be done before you're able to automate it. But once you have that first piece done, it makes it really, really easy for the execution piece. Chesy helps with both the processes and automation. Okay, I'm done with the plugs. But just know the benefit of making ERG leaders' job easier is that then they have more time to focus on the creative part, the part that really excites them, that links up with their passion. Okay, I remember this one is the last one because this is also specifically for ERG leader program managers. Is to come through for them, hands on. Like honestly, by you understanding the day-to-day of what ERGs involve, and by you being in the process, you'll be better equipped to identify the gaps in it. Learn the pain points, resolve them. And then I have over here, your benefits for your ERG leaders. We don't have time to get into it. I want to leave some time for questions. But once again, what you told ERG leaders would happen, is it happening for them? You told them that they were going to get X, Y, and Z by being an ERG leader. Is it actually happening? This is what you can learn. Take all your learnings from your listening tour. And that's also why I said evaluate yourself. Like, wow, am I missing some things from the process? And then whatever you have currently, maybe it's time to reevaluate and see if there's new things that you can incorporate. ERG leader benefits doesn't always have to be compensation. In case you're at a company that it's a little tighter on the budget, it doesn't always have to be compensation, but truly mentorship goes a really long way. In increasing their network goes a really long way. So there are other things that an ERG leader might be interested in. A question that I made sure to ask on my listening tours before making any decisions was, selfishly, as an ERG leader, what is it that you want from this program? 9 times out of 10, because these are people that operate truly off of passion and they're like, I just want to help my community, that's probably what you'll get. But dig deep, push on them a little bit, and you'll typically find that there's something that they want that can also help to benefit their career. All right, so that's what we have. Bonus, and I left this for last for a reason, because new leaders is not something that I think that that's like our default. Like ERG leaders are burnt out, so it's time to get new ones. It's not the case, but in some cases, you might have the right ERG leaders, but they might not have a clear role in the ERG, or they might be in the wrong role. So look at what roles you have. It's important that it fits that person. And maybe that's a conversation that you can have within the listening tour. Incorporate that as a question. Is this the role that truly fits you, or do you feel like there's another one that better fits you? Then there's a case where just might not be a good fit. And honestly, by you asking the person, like, is this what you want to do? Like, just be honest with me. There's obviously a way you have to ask that question, but asked correctly, it might actually be a huge relief where they're like, you know what, I actually was volunteered to do this, and I'm ready to pass it on to someone else. And like I said, they may have just been looking to you to ask the question to set them free. So that's all I have. Thank you all for listening to me rant for 48 minutes. Hopefully it was helpful. Can I get like something in the chat if it was helpful, so I know, but also open to questions too. And that's what I have.
Awesome. You're getting some love in the chat, so clearly it was helpful, Maceo. We are going to open it up for a quick Q&A. But before we hop into that, I just want everyone to know that I dropped our community link in the chat. So like Maceo mentioned, an easy way to prevent ERG burnout is to connect your ERG leaders to other ERG leaders internally and externally. So invite your ERG leads to that, invite your other program managers. Let's all join and come together, share best practices and resources. That's exactly what that space is for. Looking in the chat for questions, I know I saw one. Okay, one question from Leah. What do you do when you sense burnout from older members, but you need the resources as a newer leader?
From when you sense burnout from older members, but you need the resources as a newer leader, I would say, and I think when you say members, you're referencing like ERG leaders, I think, if I'm understanding correctly. If you sense that burnout from those people who've already been doing the work, you just have to ask the questions, honestly, and get to know, like I said, pain points, their thoughts. Now, honestly, if you sense burnout, that means that there's probably going to be a hint of that cynicism in there, where they're a little bit negative towards it. So take it with a grain of salt. Because you're newer, you can still have that passion and that drive to either try to reinvigorate it in them. So kind of like I mentioned earlier, remind them why they're doing what they're doing. But more than anything, if you feel like it's just time, and they may also feel too like it's time to just move on to a new role, that's okay. Just try to learn as much as possible about historical things that have happened, what has worked and what hasn't in their opinion. And also just collecting whatever data they have is big too. Like I said, qualitative and quantitative data, when it meets together, it gives you the full story. So especially just trying to get it hands on the information that they have already.
Awesome. Question from Soraya. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, but can you list 3 most helpful pieces of data to have around engagement aside from Zoom attendees? I know you're a data girl, so.
Narrowing it down to 3. Oh, that's fun. Okay. Number 1, I would say program reach. I've made up most of these. I don't think that, I've made up most of these in my brain, so I'll explain them. Program reach. What's the percentage of the company that's actually engaged in your ERGs? And when I say engaged, I mean either attended an event, participated in a survey, or part of your Slack channel or on your distro list. Just putting all that together. What's the percentage of people in your company that have participated in ERGs at all? From there, honestly, I think really and truly from there, breaking that down and understanding that by location, by tenure, even here's another one that's really helpful, is breaking that down by your senior leader. So your C-suite, M-team, whatever you call it, the people who are at the top next to the CEO, understanding engagement by that, which you can there's ways to do it, honestly, if you work with your people ops team. But then when you go to have those conversations, the people at the top C-suite, those are like your mega influencers. Those are the people that if they say, go to the next ERG event, and they say it, especially down at like even the, I don't want to say the lowest level. I come from support, so no, I mean it with love, but like the lowest level of the company, if they say, hey, definitely I endorse the ERG program, that's something that's going to like really get engagement to go up. So understanding it by C-suite is honestly a game changer there too.
Awesome. What's the best way to find ERG events on LinkedIn? The events you suggested to share with ERG leads.
I will say be part of a community. There's so many, if I'm being honest. I'm not gonna lie. I don't really know of too many things outside of Slack. And I know that some companies are very strict about Slack usage. So I'm just putting it out there. Most of the communities that I'm part of are on Slack. There are a few other ones on LinkedIn I'm happy to promote, but I mean, definitely, I would imagine the Chesney community is something worth joining to learn more about. They have monthly events.
Yes,
So
I will just pop in here. We do have monthly ERG events. They're all focused on different parts of the ERG journey. So join our ERG community, join our newsletters. We're always pushing those out. The next one will be announced soon. Question from Natalie. How do you address the time charging issue when all of the work the ERG leaders do has to be done on your own time? How do you get people excited to join and make change?
yes, that's a big one. I'll say it's honestly in how you market the ERG and it's in the ERG leader position. That's really where that lies. And there's two parts to that, because one, you have to, especially as an ERG program manager, let's assume that you are, because I'm just guessing, but you would have to have a conversation with leadership, especially if this is a case where it's like hourly employees, especially who have to like do it off their own time and things like that. It's important that you have a conversation with workforce management or whoever manages like the time piece of it. And understand, number one, give them the value of the ERG program and why it matters that people are able to participate. And then also having a really clear process on how people can participate. I personally say make sure that that's set up in advance. Oftentimes ERG programs are already running though, when like us ERG program managers come in. So in that case, it's never too late to just start a relationship with that team and to get something going. Yeah, oftentimes it is an afterthought, but besides that, how do you get people excited? That's why I really say having clear roles is a game changer. Already you can get the people who just have a passion for the work. And maybe that is where you bring in someone from another company to come in and just speak about all the great things ERGs can do. But in addition to that, if you have clear roles, you can say, hey, for people who are interested in one day getting into internal communications, we have this role. It's a communications lead for the Pride ERG. If you get in this role, you'll have more connections with our internal communications team. You'll also get some hands-on practice, sending out company-wide emails, all these things. And this is something where it connects the ERG leader role to something that people want to do to progress their career. So that's something that'll also excite them to get involved. I think you're muted.
Sorry. I think we have time for one more question. So if anyone has anything, feel free to drop it in the chat or come off mute. I'll give it a few seconds, and then if not, we can go ahead and close it out. Any other questions? Feel free to come off mute. Okay, one last question. How do you recommend pushing back against the pet to threat pipeline?
I think that is something I've been familiar with like, I think it was like around Black women going from like, yeah, I saw that. I read that article too. Pushing back against it. That's a deep question. That's a deep question. I don't even know if I can get into that with this one, honestly, but I'll just say as a Black woman, I'm not going to speak to allies right now. But as a Black woman, I'll just say keep showing up as who you authentically are, unapologetically. Honestly, that's really all I can really say. We already know that we have to show up like 2 times as hard to try to like level up with other people and other people's opinions. So just keep being authentically you. I personally am a really big fan of, I'm an overachiever. That's just who I am. So that's just me. I like to kind of show people up, and that's just, yeah, that's a long story. But anyway, that's part of my ERG story and like what motivates me. So even to that point, I would say motivate other Black women in that case to also show up in the same way. That's what I have on that.
Awesome. And I think that's a great way to end it. So thank you, Maceo, for your time. We're getting a lot of good reactions in the chat. This was incredible. I think it's going to be really helpful as ERGs become more prevalent in DEI strategy and DEI and just the DEI space, like making sure that your ERG leaders are set up for success. So thank you. And thank you all for joining. This will be recorded and posted on our site a little bit later this afternoon, if not tomorrow. And then I'll send out the recording link to everyone so you can pass it on to your ERG leads. Again, feel free to join the ERG community out in Slack. And then if you want to connect about Chezi, feel free to email me at demaby@chezi.co. I'll put it in the chat as well. But have a great rest of your, what day is today? Wednesday. Thank you all. Bye.